Bienvenue, mesdames, messieurs, bonjour. Welkom, dames en heren. Welcome everybody to workshop 2. This is the first of 2 workshops. We're linking them. This first workshop is under the title Confronting the Digital Divide. And our subtitle today is Internet Access or as Human Rights for Minorities. So minorities are our focus. Tomorrow afternoon at the same time, Workshop 10, we're going to focus specifically on refugees and newcomers. So thank you very much for coming today. My name is Marianne Franklin. I'm your moderator today. I'd like to thank all the people who've helped put this workshop together, all the great content on the wiki page. So if you want to have a look at the result of our preliminary discussions, if you go onto the EuroDIG program 2016 and look at access and literacy. But as we are claiming that access and literacy cannot be considered separately from human rights issues for internet design, access and use, we will persist in linking these 2 rubrics that the whole meeting is organised around. So do check out those wiki pages. And our discussion today will be based a little bit on those preliminary ideas. And if anyone has looked at those wiki pages, you will see how rich this discussion can be. So it's my job today to allow you all to speak as you wish, but also to give you some shape to the program and to be ready for the coffee break in an hour and a half. I'd like to introduce our remote participant moderator, Hanan Boujami, currently co-chair of the Internet Rights and Principles Coalition and project manager at HEVOS. And we have Teek here who's going to help with the room. We have Charles, one of the speakers, who's going to be speaking and holding the microphone, so he's a very important person to get to know. He will give you the microphone. And we have our other speakers who I will introduce to you right now. We have Valentina Pelletzer from One World Platform. To my left, to her left is Ruth Hennell from Bristol, representing the youth thought. So wave your hand, because way down there they can't see you. And we have Charles Neville from Yandex, and Charles is a world-renowned expert on disability design. And Kiamas Bagbani here, wave your hand, and he is representing the International Federation of Library Associations. And a number of you are in the room, and I know you are ready and willing to speak, and please feel free. Our hashtag is #MinoritieSInternet. Please, when you're tweeting, include hashtag EuroDIG16, because then you will get up on the big tweet wall. We want that.
And it means you say less.
Exactly. Okay. So I just want to prove a point that Charles and I discovered about how architecture is so important, about the design issues that we want to get into. I believe that these 2 workshops are a milestone in the history of EuroDIG and in the history of the Internet Governance Forum meetings, because we are here very consciously looking at minorities in a very inclusive sense. We are problematizing the term, but we are also acknowledging there is such a thing as disadvantaged minority issues that have yet to be addressed fully within the emerging rubric of human rights for internet design, access and use. But we're even just as excited about tomorrow, because we're going to tackle the hottest political topic on the European agenda at the moment, and that is refugees and newcomers. And the word newcomers we will look at tomorrow. So we're very, very excited to have a range of experts with us today and tomorrow. So please join us. But anyway, let's look at the room. Look around the room and look at the way the room is organised. It's organised as a square circle. And we came in and we thought, oh, that's nice, but it's a very deep square circle. How do we get into the middle? And we discovered that the tables were actually tied together in such a way we could not break it open. So this is what we've actually had to do. I have to just put the microphone down for a minute. Could someone text for someone who can't see this, what I'm about to do? We had to find the thing that was holding all this together, undo it, unplug something, untape something, make sure we broke nothing, in order to be able to do something very, very simple, and I will show. Ta-da! Anybody else want to join me in the middle? Because and you want to take your shoes off, feel free. The carpet is gorgeous. Okay. But this is just to prove quite physically how architecture matters. How a space is organized in meat space matters. So if you are having trouble following what's this got to do with internet governance or policy making, what's this got to do with the technical decisions that brilliant engineers make every day, it's this. What we take for granted is inclusive, is in fact, for some cases, excluding, not deliberately, sometimes just by circumstance, and assuming this is the appropriate way to work. So I hope you don't mind me charging up and down the room. Maybe confrontational for some, okay? If I offend with my bare feet, please let me know quietly. So that's it, really. We have one more exercise before I shut up and let the panelists begin, just a set of instructions. We have a beautiful hat, I believe. Charles, is that okay? Teak, would you like to? We would like to invite anyone who feels like they want to answer this question to write down on a piece of paper with a pen. This guarantees anonymity completely. It guarantees that you will not be data mined, data tracked, data archived or surveyed at any point. Please feel free to consider this question seriously and write down the piece of paper you have, and Teak will be coming around to collect it and put it in Charles's beautiful hat. This is the question. What is the one thing that has to change in order to confront the digital divide effectively? So I repeat, what is the one thing that has to change in order to confront the digital divide effectively? You all got that? It's up there, so you can read it. Thank you very much. You're not obliged to answer, but feel free to write on a piece of paper and we'll address it later. So, let's get going. We have 4 wonderful panelists, and I'm not sure who wants to start, doesn't really matter, whoever wants to start. And they're going to open up the floor. I think we'll start with Charles, mainly because he's got the mic, and I want him free to roam around with the mic. If you want to speak, please put up your hand. You'll get the mic, and we need to know who you are and where you're from. Okay? So, the first question I've asked my wonderful panelists here is for them to tell us in so many words, briefly, what they consider minorities, internet access and human rights to mean for them in their work. So, Charles, you first.
Me, because I got the mic. So I'm Charles. I'm from Yandex. Well, I'm from Australia, but I work for Yandex. And a bunch of stuff I do is working on the web to figure out... Can I have a piece of paper too, please? Take, come back. Can I have one, please? Ah, right, go on. Working out how to actually make sure the web works for people with disabilities of various kinds. Because if you don't think about it hard, then a lot of the time it doesn't. You know, and these are not things where it's like, you know, people can figure out how to fix it, right? It's not like, you know, it's no big deal. Minorities. You know, if I take the streaming thing seriously, then you guys are all the minority, and I should have my back to you so I can look at the camera and talk to the huge majority out there, right? Instead, in disability, you know, 10, 20% of people have disabilities. No one knows exactly how many, because all of the people who argue about exactly how many it is, you know, are just counting definitions. But as well as 10 or 20% of people, you know, being part of the market, being able to take part as citizens and as participants in society or not, it's their friends and their families and their colleagues and their co-workers and their employers, you know, and their students and their teachers, all the people who would or would not work with them. So the minority affected is actually all of the people around everyone. It's a very large number in disability in particular.
Thanks very much, Charles. It's very important that we're not simply talking about one individual, we're talking about their network and that network of that network. Thanks. We have some people on remote, so I'd like to include them if they have anything to add. So that's Charles talking about disabilities as a widening pool of groups. Who's next? Valentina?
Give me the power. Okay, so the power. But I was not so good at removing obstacles, so I will walk. So, minorities. First, any of us can become a minority. Minority is not a status that you got when you are born. And we very often think that minority are the others, the poor others, that we in our gorgeous generosity decide to help. But each and everyone is a minority. Because if we talk about access or literacy, there are things from which we are excluded. It can be because of the gender. You're not the right gender. It can be because of your sexual orientation. It can be because of your language. Your language can be written or oral. Not all the people read, not all the people listen. So minority is a continuum and change. And to understand, we should ask ourselves, who is out?
Wait for me.
Okay.
So I will stop here.
Thank you very much, Valentina. Kimas, would you like to follow on with that? So hand over the power, share the power.
Yeah, just I can give an example. I apologize for my bad English, however. I can speak Finnish, but nobody can understand for sure. And Persian. When I came to Finland, arrived to Finland in beginning of 90, I go to the library and ask for example, some Persian magazine, why there is no anything for us. And we were a big group of Persian speaker from Iran, Afghanistan. And they say, wow, this kind of small groups, we have no, for minorities, budget magazine. So what you are saying, all Finnish speaker in the world are 5 million. And the Persian speaker is 150 at that time, millions. So who is minority, who is majority? And it's one example. And I think, as she said, in different places or different occasions, everybody can be a minority.
Okay, thank you. I think very important. When we talk about minorities, it's not just the numbers. And if we remember apartheid South Africa, that's a very telling historical example. A minority, you may be the majority in numbers, but disadvantaged and disenfranchised nonetheless. Very important point. Thank you very much. And we have Ruth with your... Just getting the microphone for Ruth.
I also agree with this comments about what is and isn't a minority. I'm particularly thinking, like, as myself, my personal experiences of having mental health issues and experiencing homelessness, that as soon as you start speaking to people about it, they go, oh yeah, that happened to me or my family member or someone else. It's not this like group of people that are like other. It's people, you know, within your society and within your networks. And my feeling is that the people that we call minorities on the internet are actually people who are being marginalized on the internet. And so it's much more about designing the internet for everybody and seeing who is excluded, rather than going, oh, there are some minorities that need to be taught how to use the internet the way that we want to design it.
Thanks very much, Ruth. Very important point. Does anyone from the floor like to add to our initial points about terms of reference at this point? Feel free. Anyone? Oh, Kiamas. Yeah.
Because I have a lot of experiences in the my first book published in 95, and for that, when we had access to internet, and in University of Jyväskylä, I wrote it in the computer in Persian language, because it was both Persian and Finnish, and but the computer at that time for Persian language was just like a typewriter, nothing else. And at that time, we had a very long process with help of those who are working in IT, and then we make a copy of Persian, then scan all the pages and make like a picture and they put it together, and it was very, I mean, it's one thing and it's very important to have a possibility for all different languages, especially those languages that are in Latin alphabet.
Thank you, exactly. And it's often also not just the actual alphabets, but also the layout, how something looks is very culturally specific and tied to the language. Is that correct? And Roman language readers often forget that most of the world actually doesn't read left to right and down. They read in other directions. And we forget that. So perhaps we're talking a little bit about what is the default setting in some respect, if we want to use a techie term. Does anyone else want to talk a little bit about which other minorities, so to speak, need to be put on the table here, or the term itself? We've been talking about homeless groups. I myself have done some work in that regard. And the assumption is if you're homeless, you shouldn't have a mobile phone. Somehow, house first, mobile phone later. It's extraordinary the sort of abuse a rough sleeper can be subjected to if they whip out their mobile phone. And people attest to this. Issues around language, layout and design. Any other comments from anyone on the floor?
Yes, Marianne, I have one remotely. An important point is being made by Joe Dixon. He's from Southampton, UK. He's saying that I relate to what Charles said about counting people who match a definition. My minorities are those living in the UK whose society deemed to be functionally illiterate. This includes people who don't look like minorities or tick any boxes. They may match majority profiles in terms of ethnicity, gender, etc., and often hide their difficulties, but then they're not supposed to find appropriate ways of using the internet. They're helped to struggle with using it in a way the majority does.
Okay, any comments on that?
Hang on. There's a guy holding onto the microphone.
Yes, but that's just because I gave it to him.
I
Sebastian,
also
did you want
wanted
to
to
mention?
contribute,
Yes,
but
Sebastian.
not to this point. So.
Okay. Any contributions to this point about how the definition itself is suspect, so to speak? We use it as a descriptor for so-called disadvantaged, or what we think are numerically smaller groups who need special treatment. But we're hearing a completely different picture, that in fact, what you look like does not dictate where you fit. Somebody on our wiki was mentioning about multiple layers of identity and affiliation and issues. Is there only one way that we can be defined in terms of design, access and use of these extraordinary technologies? Is there only one universal form of access? Is there a standard that needs to be set? Or are we talking about a complex set of interlocking, intersecting, multiple standards, which is a design challenge I would think many designers would enjoy? Perhaps. Any designers in the room like to comment? I see Olivier nodding.
Yeah, thanks very much, Marianne. Olivier Crépin-Leblanc. I'm the chair of the English chapter of the Internet Society and also the chair of the European at-large organization. I've been on the net for a very long time, and originally I was in the technical community, one of your original Internet geeks back then, when very few other people were on the net. It has evolved an enormous amount, and as far as the design of the services are concerned, because it's a commercial offering and it's always private sector led, when you start looking at the actual commercial offerings, you will find that it caters for the majority of people, and then minorities, and so you're talking about, of course, minorities geographically, but also people who are disabled, the elderly as well, I think, is a very important category. Your eyesight goes. My eyesight is starting to go slowly, and I realize how small the characters are on the screen. All of this takes sort of is left on the side, and it isn't really at the edge of the development of new apps, new technology, new things. It's funny because I often see the internet as being a bit of an elastic train. So you've got the front of the train, which is where the cutting edge stuff comes out. And then you've got the back of the train where you basically have to try and catch up with the front of the train. And there have been some times when the internet train has shortened itself. So in the mid-90s, I would say, when there was this first internet that was implemented, Africa was lagging behind all of the other regions of the world in having internet access. And suddenly they caught up. Within 5 years, most African countries had internet access. And then suddenly the front of the train started moving forward with all of these, the dot-com bubble, moving forward with a lot of services that were only available in developed countries, in specific markets, Western Europe, North America. And then it started going closer together again. Now we've got this jump with IPv6. That is another thing moving forward. We've also got the other concern, which is the Internet of Things, where there are a lot of different applications that will be good for developing countries, but they're just not quite there yet because the infrastructure is lagging behind. And as I said, the designers usually go for the big markets where they can make big money. They don't go for the markets where there is an actual need, but very few people are interested in that need because it can't bring cash in.
Thanks. You've brought up the hot issue of research and development. We will return to this, I'm sure. Are there any immediate comments on this point? Valentina?
Just, if I don't lose my... to be honest, it's not that it's for the majority. The business model is not developing for the majority. It's developing for the richer or the less poorer, because the majority, it's out. And there is another minority that we have to call out, and it's the minority of the decision maker, because they are the only real minority, but they hold the key.
Thank you, Valentina. Kiemas?
Yeah, I have also, there is something wrong with that. When we say minorities, it's a language also is like a disabled minority. But I think it's two different things, because somebody, as you say, the richer, they make a tool, and that I have know that tool. You made it for English speaker, but I'm Persian speaker. And well, it's different as be disabled. We are not disabled. You have a tool, but we don't have. And you are going to sell us with that amount of money, maybe that we have not. We have no. Well, it is a little problem in my mind.
I think you've had a point about being positioned as disabled when in fact you're not disabled, in the understanding that Charles's work is, for instance, but being positioned as disabled in a way that shouldn't necessarily be the case. But if you were disabled and also speaking a language that's not catered for, arguably that makes things worse. I was just thinking, surely design innovation, something designers want to be innovative about. So, Sebastian?
I'm so sorry, you keep jumping out of the topic that I want to connect to.
We'll bring us back.
So I was like, I might connect to languages now. Finally, I might say something, and then you're going back to design. I was gonna go there. My name is Sebastian. I work in the European Parliament for Julia Reda. So I, helped organize the workshop that we have tomorrow at 14:30, just around this place. So I wanted to connect to languages, because I think, especially in Europe, one thing that we experience every day, particularly people being expats here in Brussels, we experience geo-blocking. And geo-blocking is a huge topic, not only for expats who are probably not minorities and not, the people that are needed of immediate help. But language minorities in countries are, and geo-blocking is a huge factor, excluding them from information, disallowing them to access their cultural productions. So we started a campaign recently to end geo-blocking in Europe, and hopefully once and for all. So I would like to invite you to join that campaign if you like, because it has to do with minorities. It is endgeoblocking.eu. And yeah.
Thanks, Sebastian. I would still argue that is deeply integral to questions of design. But maybe you can disagree. Before we move on to the next set of topics, are there any final comments about how we understand, frame, and define our minorities? Charles.
So I really liked Ruth's framing. We're talking about marginalisation, right? It's not about counting numbers. I sort of disagree a bit with Valentina. Businesses often go for the money, right? But as an example of technical marginalization, the US has been repeatedly technically marginalized compared to Africa. There are things like making payments on the internet. Africa was way ahead of the US and of Europe, in fact. A lot of mobile technology stuff. The US was pretty far behind, even for the filthy rich people at the top of the tree. There are lots of ways that the marginalization cuts. And the other point about design development is critical. In my world, where you have blind people and deaf people trying to work with video resources, it's really obvious that there are different design considerations that you have to bring together to make stuff work. And where you're not only producing content, but requiring people to use it, say you want to pay your taxes, some people do want to, then you have to actually make it possible. Right? There has to be consideration of what are the things that make it possible.
Thank you very much. I think it's time to also consider our second big term, access. Would we want to think about access in the sense of not simply physical access points, such as where does one go if you don't have your own internet connection, you cannot pay for it, you're in a situation of insecure housing, you've been kicked out of your home, you have limited sources. Where can you go? That's one sort of access. But our discussion on the wiki page also highlighted some very complex issues around once you are online, what sorts of terms of use and ways in which you access goods and services may have an impact on how you behave and what you do. If, for instance, you're coming from a group who would be considered a subculture, for instance, transsexual, bisexual, gay communities. What if you needed a safe space to discuss things online without having to be subject to hate speech or other forms of cyberbullying? What if you're just a kid who doesn't want your parents looking at what you do all the time on Facebook, that sort of thing? So what about terms of access once we're online? And this is getting us up a level. We often think access is physical. I'd just like to ask my panelists from their experience, what sorts of issues around access once you are able to get online, whatever that might be, by mobile, by an internet connection in the library, borrowing somebody's laptop, what issues are arising for access from the point of view of minorities or marginalized groups?
I forgot what I was going to say now. The main areas that I was thinking about, one is that yesterday I went to open a bank account, and it's quite difficult to open a bank account when you're not in full-time employment and you're disabled and you don't meet the correct criteria. And I already have a bank account, so I'm quite lucky that they would only give me a basic card for this one. And I thought, actually, that's a massive problem, and it's a massive problem. I work with asylum seekers and refugees as a volunteer, and it's a massive problem in the organisation I'm part of that looks at homelessness and mental health, because if you don't have access to a bank card that lets you buy stuff online, then you're excluded from a lot of services. You're excluded from buying cheap travel tickets, you're excluded from paying your bills online, you're excluded from ordering the cheapest things that you want to order, and you're also very limited if you want to buy anything like software, even if you have the money. So you might have a double whammy. You either don't have the money or you have the money, but you can't actually pay for it. And the second point I wanted to make was around a lot of people create their own sort of safe spaces using Facebook groups. It's increasingly common, in my experience, I've seen it in health-related groups with a family member who has a chronic illness, who uses that as a way to maintain, a lot of her and her friends use it as a way to maintain a connection with the outside world and with each other. But Facebook groups still use algorithms to decide who sees what is posted and when. And so if you've got a supportive group of 50 100 people who have the same condition or situation that you are in, and you post something and no one answers, or some people don't see it, and that's because of an external algorithm that's deciding which things in your support group should be shown to the other people, that's a big problem for me in access. So it's great that we can make our own groups to support ourselves and not have to, always be in this public sphere. But that makes me really uncomfortable.
So exactly, can we perhaps think a little further about that? Any other comments? Once online, finding oneself perhaps in a difficult situation. Olivier first, and then Charles. Kiyomas, did you have?
Yeah, thanks, Marianne. It's Olivier speaking. And you've touched on the Facebook groups, but of course this is true of pretty much everything on the internet through the use of cookies. Your internet is not the internet of your neighbor. Depending on what interests you have, your results in search engines, your every website that you visit might be completely changed according to your preferences, in quotes, especially when it comes down to advertising and things like that. And so we all end up in being in parallel internets, but not the same internet. And that kind of focuses people more into their own little corner rather than actually getting them to have access to pretty much everything that's out there. It's a real concern.
Thanks, Olivier. Charles, and then Kiyomas wants to comment.
First riffing on that. Yeah, you one of the problems of creating spaces in Facebook, it's like, wait a minute, this is some organization that is taking all kinds of things you don't understand from you in exchange for a service. And we don't often think about who should be providing these services. Is this something that we want the technology guys to be defining the limits of? Is this something we want the business guys to define the limits? Or is this something we want government, which is society's instrument for control by the people, depending on where you are, to be putting limits on things? And so there are different implications when different parts of the decision get made. And then you mentioned a lot the obvious access thing for people with disabilities is, does stuff work? There are very fundamental technical reasons why things will or won't work for a certain group of people, why something can be translated or not translated. And when the people who take our taxes and spend our money buy systems that were developed without thinking very carefully about who was the target audience beyond rich guys in Silicon Valley, then we run the risk again and again of building in further barriers, of entrenching the marginalization.
Thanks very much, Charles. Kiyomas?
Yeah, just all of us, we know about the news from United States, the terrorist telephone, and the company doesn't like to open the code. Well, it's good, but when I am looking at, for example, my country, Iran, those companies give this opportunity to the police, that police can, one day after demonstration in the street, they can follow all those people who are holding a smartphone. So it's some kind of, this kind of thing make a limitation for people to use internet. Well, we know the internet is not such as strong as in Europe or another country. Also, is some limitation. But this kind of problem that in the world there is two kind of law or something like order that we are facing with is a limitation. My brother, okay, he's afraid to answer my message because of something. It's limitation, but it's coming from maybe from the money makers who give this opportunity to the police to control everything.
Yes, exactly. Any comments on that? I think we need to move through into our next area because we're heading that way. We had 5 points for the debate. The first was terms of reference, and I hope you're we're starting to crack open this idea that we need to re-articulate our understanding of minorities, attach it to other sorts of disadvantage and marginalizations. And sometimes it's about position. The default language is Finnish, but the most people in the world, more people in the world speak Farsi, speak Persian than speak Finnish. But because you're in Finland, the assumption is Finnish first. So there is a position there. So in that mindset, it's very complicated. Let's think about perhaps even more complex because of the politics involved and the money perhaps involved. One of our themes was regulatory and commercial environments. And Charles has brought it up again and again. At the end of the day, who pays for these innovations, this research and development? Do we leave it to the free market and to these very powerful commercial providers, or should our governments and our local governments, our regional governments, should they play a role in ensuring funds and space for these kinds of innovations that allow people to get online and once online to use all that is available in ways that most others do take for granted? So anybody want to try and respond to the regulatory and commercial environment issue, and perhaps be concrete about what you think needs to happen? Whether you think it needs to be a commercial initiative and what you think that should be, or whether you think it's down to your national or local government to do something and what you think they need to do. I have Valentina here. Anybody else? The rest of the room are more than welcome to participate. Anyone on remote?
I start with the money and then you continue. Because I think that when we talk about commercial, if we talk about innovation and we do not attach and its growth and it's not attached to development, I think that the kind of research we will have is to bring back the money to the richer. I will do an example, naming, maybe it's not so nice, but I mean, there is a company, it's called Microsoft, and there is a foundation, it's called Melinda and Gates, and they work a lot on health. And they are for innovation, and they also use technology. The technology for health that they suggest is developed in the north, are the rich tech health company. So I think that when we talk about commercial models, government and things, we need to understand if the center, what we are talking about, it's about development. It's about really making a better world for anyone. Because research, innovation led to a commercial that it's a capitalist venture. We need to understand the basic of a capitalist venture. It's not the good of the people, it's getting the richest possible. One person is rich at the top of the pyramids, the other just work for the richest. So this model, we can get some benefit, but it's, I would say, an accessory of the model.
Any responses to that very clear point about where the priority should lie? Charles?
So, you know, companies and people who are making money out of stuff, you know, they're there to make money. And they make money because they find a market. Right? That means they find someone who needs what they're doing. And that's what makes them a potentially very useful engine of innovation. Yeah, we should not be trying to destroy that innovation engine and only have the government-funded engine, partly because if you look at the way that, I don't know, say the European Commission, which hands out bazillions of euros every year, that there's a corporate structure that's not so different from company structures in the way that that research is done. We need to allow that kind of research, but I think as governments and as the people who try and influence our governments, we need to say to our governments, hey, don't just let everyone go off and do whatever they want. Don't let the technologists go and say, trust us, we're looking after your best interests, because they're not. Some of them by accident are, some of them on purpose are, but there's no clear way of knowing who are the good guys and who are the bad guys. Governments are in the role of setting limits to what you can do and what you can do to other people. And they're also generally in the role of handing out money and setting up legal frameworks that might make it easier to do research on making actual things that are useful, or might make it easier to do research on figuring out how you can extract more money by understanding people's advertising preferences better. So governments send signals to companies all the time, and we should be telling them, send signals that match what we want to achieve. Countries that don't have a development or don't have much development should be saying, send signals that doing development here instead of just importing everything is helpful to us in the long run.
I mean, this brings us to one of the other points, because these 5 points, of course, are intimately connected, but the future or the principles of public access. I mean, Charles, if that's the case, I mean, what can governments do? Should they not fulfill their role as enablers of human rights? Enabling, if universal access to the internet is a sustainable development goal, it effectively is, connecting the next billion, how are governments supposed to do this? So let's think practically. Think about public access points and the physical access points. Universities, libraries particularly, how can, and libraries are often local government funded or national government funded, so my colleagues here from the IFLA perhaps, what impediments are happening or what things are happening to the good that are allowing people to access online goods and services in a public space, no matter what their background is? Is there anything happening there that we need to hear about? I hope something is.
Well, I'm working for Helsinki City Library, and this kind of thing. Okay, now we are in Helsinki. They are going to make a very big, huge library. The name is Central Library, and for that reason, now I'm working in one project and I'm going to ask minorities, especially foreigners who are living in Finland, what they are looking for in library and what is necessary to be there and what else they need more than books and music and this kind of thing. And the most important thing is this modern media and the internet and this kind of thing. That we have, for example, we have 68 libraries, 6 mobile, and the others are the. And the library I'm working with is about 40 computers, and everybody can use. But if I remember, it was one question. There is sometimes some limitation for somebody. For example, as you say, yes, you're homeless and bad-looking guy or little bit smelling bad, something like that. So it's problem. And another thing is foreigner who have no identity card, because usually when they are coming, everybody come to library need to have library card to use the internet. And if not, if they are, for example, tourists, they show passport. And with that passport, we give them a code for one day or one time. But for those, they have no any paper, so there is almost impossible to access to the internet. I don't know, it was far from that question, but...
No, it's very pertinent because it reminds us what Ruth was saying earlier, and certainly most of us will attest. Without ID, you cannot get access to the public access. So for various reasons, if you don't have ID, you're already blocked from possibly the only point of public access. That has changed. It used to be a lot easier to walk into a library and just log on. Now there's a lot more identification and authentication going on. But libraries also, parts of Europe, are seeing their public libraries cut, seeing the funding cut. The UK, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, there's a number of local libraries have been closing. Certainly Australia and New Zealand has been experiencing, that's not Europe, but a lot of European immigrants living in Australia and New Zealand, so it's a global world. But just as an example, funding has been cut for public libraries. So perhaps I could ask a more provocative question. Oh, and we see someone you don't have to answer this question, but I'll say it anyway and we can think about it. should we worry about minorities? Isn't the internet and access to it an individual matter and you should just work it out yourself? I mean, I was just thinking, perhaps, are we being a little bit naive about this? You don't have to answer this, but sorry, I forgot. Please say your name. And
Hi, everybody. My name is Huda. I'm a PhD student on Scuola Normale Superiore in University of Bologna in Italy, and I want to elaborate on the point of public access. Like, for me, I can relate to because I'm a PhD student researcher, and I find that access to academic content is very constrained. I go to these journals. Their business model is based on I can either access that either by my institution or by paying for individual access, and the average price for each paper it goes maybe $30 per page. So sometimes we are forced to resort to other illegals for getting that content. The thing is just paying for a paper for paying like $30 per paper for content that we don't know even if it will be totally relevant to our research is a bit sometimes some students cannot afford it, and sometimes some university they cannot also afford to pay for a pricey subscription to these journals. So this is also an issue that should be also focused on trying to provide complete access or free access to academic content, because at the end knowledge should not be privileged. So this is the point that I want to elaborate on.
Yes, and thank you very much. Very important. Carry on.
Hello, everybody. It's really nice to see that it's such a diverse attendees here. There are people from different genders, different ages, and I presume different countries. My name is Socrates Holmgren Kakadousis. It's a really long name, as I know, and I'm just a normal. Wait, oh, it's okay. I'm just a normal person from civil society. I don't have an academic. I don't have an academic education yet, but I'm working on it. I wanted to answer Marianne's question about if we should care about if the minorities have access to internet, if it cares, and why should we care? Well, I would say, yeah, we should care, because if you look at the internet, if you look at the global internet, which are without borders, without fragmentation, as it should be, it's part of something bigger. It's also has an immense sorry, got lost there. It's an immense source of knowledge, of art, and of information, what's happening in the world. And to be a bit extreme, it's a human right to be a part of all this knowledge and all these sources. So yeah, we should care, because if we will only diversify a large group of minorities, because minorities, when you put them in a bunch, get quite many people, because there are many minorities, as we say, and yeah, that's kind of what I'm trying to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Socrates. Great to see more from the floor.
Hello, everybody. I'm a bit sleepy. My name is Fadumo, and I come from Deutschland. I call myself a Dutch lady for now, but originally from Somalia. I grew up in Kenya. I'm in Germany right now, so long history. Basically, it's a good question. Why do we have to care for the minorities? Definitely, yes. If you look into the position of the newcomers, the so-called refugees, I don't like to define myself in that position. I advocate so much in using normal names or something very different. I think the newcomer community has been left out. Everybody's talking right now about different communities, but this community, somebody mentioned before and others as well. I think what we need to focus is, if we talk about the point of integration, there are a lot of migrants, asylum seekers, refugees, the newcomers community, to fit into the society. How do we really come into the society if we have been isolated and kicked out? We need to have some sort of cultural exchange. We need to learn the language, because I would love to speak German. I can speak some German, I'm not zero, but my German is not so good. I'm just surviving with my small English. And coming to the community myself I come from, we need to educate each other. I don't have to learn only your culture, you need to learn my culture. In that context, at least there's a level of motivation between individuals and between people, so that nobody is vulnerable and nobody is attacked by the other society that they live with. So to sum up, I think we really have to, the most powerful thing here is education. Education is the solution to all the problems. If I try to understand you and you try to understand me, regardless of where we belong to, then I think the solution will come to its position. And internet is a key important element to solve a lot of problems for using political campaign, education, and whatever. So definitely we should care for each other. I don't care only for newcomers. I care for everybody. So, yeah.
Ooh, thank you. Just to, Socrates, you're not being extreme. As enshrined in Article 26 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, everyone has the right to educate, And in the Charter of Human Rights and Principles for the Internet, it's been read as everyone has the right to be educated about the internet and to use the internet for education, and then it breaks down. So you're not being extreme at all, Socrates. Yeah, well, I mean, this is the conversation we're looking to change today and tomorrow. But carrying on, please. Don't forget to say who you are.
Yes, I'm Fabian Rosalen. I'm the president of the Rainbow Pirates in Sweden. And I'm also trans guy. And yeah, so I know somewhat about the minority problem and what we face. As to if we should care for the minority, I mean, we have this thing called human rights that some of us think is important, but I mean, more from a egoistic point of view, there is also the, if more people are included in the internet, then we also get more ideas there, which also leads to more awesome technologies, innovative stuff, and everything like that. So we actually have a more, not only for human rights, but also for innovative purposes to include everybody, because then we can move forward in this awesome development in technology that we have today, but even faster. So,
thank you very much for involving innovation in our thinking. This is actually relevant for designers and policymakers. Thank you. Carolina, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes, Carolina from International Federation of Library Associations and Institutions. See, I thought that your question was quite radical, even if it's just a rhetorical question, that public access should be everyone's own problem, because that sort of implies that human rights does not apply to minorities, since Article 19 reads about that, well, that everyone has the right to freedom of opinion and expression, and that this right includes freedom to hold opinions without interference and to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas through any media and regardless of frontiers. So, where do you go to seek, receive, and impart information? Well, you go to libraries. And you also mentioned the library cuts, and this is actually a very worrisome part, not only because even though libraries face cuts in almost all countries at the moment in Europe, a problem is not that they are closing down, but perhaps that the staffing is taken over by volunteers who are not able in the same way as a trained librarian to educate users in the use and critique of information that they find at the library. And that is also a great worry, because you also have need of the librarians, not only the libraries. So that is a big danger I can see. And of course, education is the solution to all problems, as you said down there, and I totally agree. And librarians are educators, so it's not just a place where you get access, it's also the people who allows you to do access and how to work with those tools that you get access to. That's a very important thing.
Thank you very much. It also links our point about, we have a remote input. Yeah.
Yeah, we do have like 3 interventions from remote participants. I think the first one that I'd like to maybe elaborate on here is relating to the refugee crisis in Europe. I'm surprised until now it didn't come up in this conversation. So we have Gulthan Paulo from Turkey, and well, the statement made here is on the biggest concerns of the Syrian children in Turkey who are unable to finish their education. And I think, the assumption here is that exclusion will generate even more, you will exclude them completely from the society, and he thinks that the internet will definitely contribute to integrate them in the Turkish community, and he believes that libraries play a very crucial role in integrating minorities in, the day-to-day life of their host countries. Another point by Marta Maroni concerning the right to access the internet. She's saying that we should differentiate between the physical accessibility and the contents that are actually accessible. Indeed, broader policies to grant universal service should be the first step, and maybe even start thinking about having a social pricing to make connections accessible to all. And I believe there are many projects led by major companies in this regard. But I think we all question, their role in the industry. Like Project Loon of Google, for example, is a very good initiative, but it's quite controversial as well. Free Basics is also meant to provide certain services, but there is a huge discussion about that. There is a third point, maybe. Can I? Okay. It's about your controversial question, should we care? So, Jo, she heard an argument that the internet revolution is just like literacy revolution. When we became literate society, the fact that minority of people never gained literacy skills didn't stop society as a whole progressing towards being based on literate practices or paperwork. But I think, she thinks technological tools exist and can be developed to create an internet society that is more inclusive than that, so there is no excuse not to care. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you. I've seen some people have come into the room. We have our hat, and I just wanted to, just as a little moment, to gather our thoughts. We have a question for people, if they wish, to write on paper, anonymously, their answer, and I will repeat the question, where's the hat? And there are pens available for those who no longer own a pen and paper. The question is this: what is the one thing that has to change in order to confront the digital divide effectively? So if anyone has a contribution for those who've come into the room. All right. Right, yes, I was being provocative. But sometimes we do have to ask the simple question, because I get the feeling more and more people don't really care. As long as their connection works, their access works, why should I care about anybody else, really? And we're here from a practical point of view. We can get very moralistic at this point, and policymakers and designers want some real concrete suggestions about what to do, or what to change their thinking about. So we've got some comments. Charles, behind you as well, and then Charles, and Olivia, did I see you put your hand up? Obviously, good, great.
Hi, my name is Tanya Basarab, and I'm from the partnership between the Council of Europe and the EU in the field of youth. Last year, we organized a symposium on participation of young people in a digitalized world. And it was some of the messages that came out were relating to how to better use the access to internet and the whole kind of presence of information technologies in the lives of young people. And one aspect that was somehow explored, but it was quite clear, is that a lot of youth workers need support to perhaps capacity building and some maybe even technical support to get the right skills to help young people access and benefit from the digitalized world that we live in. So especially in relation to young people living in experiencing social exclusion, or as someone here mentioned, marginalized groups. And so for me, that is a question that I would like to kind of put out there, that it's not only the policymakers and, I don't know, the companies, but often these practical, the translation of the policy guidelines back into practice still needs the same kind of support and engagement of different groups.
Thank you, but I feel we have a bullet point emerging for our hardy reporter here, Minda. We have to have very short bullet points. Bullet point is about enabling actual physical help and people to help you learn how to use the stuff in libraries. What was the other one? Advising, actual guides. So a sort of internet cyber librarian kind of thing. So someone who can come up to you and say, I need help. They come up and help you. So ways of enabling that. I don't know if it's a bullet point you want, but it struck me as something there. But Olivier and then Charles. Anybody else?
Yeah, thanks, Marianne. It's Olivier speaking. And you asked, should we care? And I think that a few years ago we might have said, well, internet is more of a luxury than something that is needed for everyday life. But as the economy is moving into the e-economy, and as services are being cut in the real world for cost-cutting measures and being moved online, and this is what we're seeing in so many places, people who do not have internet access are finding it harder and harder to actually be able to conduct daily life. Finding a job, you can queue up at the employment office for 6 hours, and I'm being kind for some places, or you can do it online. Going to the opening a bank account or dealing with a bank. You can do it online very quickly, or you can go to the bank and queue up for half an hour, 45 minutes, because there's only one counter that's left. And it goes on. You've got tax these days. A number of countries are asking for people to submit their tax return online. And it just goes from start to end, and everything is moving in that direction. There used to be a joke back in the day, a few years ago, that if you search for something on Google and it wasn't there, it didn't exist. So if you search for your name on Google and you couldn't find anything about yourself, then you didn't exist. I think it actually is not much of a joke these days in saying that if you actually do not have internet access and you don't use the internet, you're not proficient in being able to use the internet, you risk not being just a second-class citizen. You risk being a no-class citizen. And that's a real worry. And we should really care about this, because we cannot just lose a significant part of population worldwide about this. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to Charles. And then I think, Charles, can you hand it to after you? And then...
So maybe I'm a bit of a stirrer. I think we need to think carefully about the difference between enabling access and forcing people into the internet, because there's a point at which people have the right to say, you know, I would like not to have my entire life listed out in a search engine or a social network or something. I would like to have my life in my control a bit more. On the other hand, there are costs for society to enable that. Right? The reason why most countries aim for universal literacy is not because we're lovely and we think it's great that everyone should be able to read Alice in Wonderland. It's so that people can pay taxes. And so that people don't drive the wrong way when they get in a car and crash into other people. There is a price to pay when you marginalize people. And fundamentally, the reason we should care is the number of marginalized people, one way or another, is almost everybody. So, yeah, we really do need to think about how we make these things work. But we also need to think about how we do it. I mean, the discussion about libraries, the Dominican Republic, over the last decade or so, spent a pile of effort building libraries, staffing them with librarians, which is to say people who are more trained than they had before, and enabling them as public access points giving people access to what amounts to a digital library, and it was fundamentally about digital first libraries. That was what they figured was appropriate in the Dominican Republic. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation very kindly gave them $1 million or so to kick that along, and $1 million goes a long way in that particular project. It may be that in another place, actually, it's much better to go out and hand out mobile phones to every homeless person and every newcomer, every person who can use a mobile phone but can't afford one, because that's a really good way to get them contributing and participating in society. It's the cheapest answer, and maybe a library isn't always a place where everyone can go. As Kimos mentioned, you can get thrown out of a library because the librarian doesn't like you. If you've got your own phone, then you have a different situation. So we need to think carefully about those two things.
Okay, I feel another bullet point coming on here. Hand out mobile phones in libraries. Okay, someone here, and then off you go.
I will just go supporting the education again. Once I am Maria Jose from Bolivia, digital sociologist, living in Sweden now. Once I moved from Bolivia to Sweden, and in Sweden they gave me all kind of technological devices that I can use, and I didn't know how to use any, and I didn't have anyone to ask how to use them. So I will go for digital literacy as a human right also. Access is not only to have access to technological devices. If I have a book and I don't know how to read it, I cannot consider myself a reader. So I will go for that. I will support the education part.
Thank you very much. Who was the I think it was Carmen, was it, at the back?
Hi, my name is Carmen Turk from Estonia. I'm an attorney and an academic in the field of internet freedoms. I marched in a bit late, and I just heard the very interesting question from Marianne that, give me one bullet point, what to do to make this divide go away. And I just kind of started to think, and I think I have a solution.
Have you written it down?
Yeah, I will give it to you. It's copyrighted, protected, but otherwise, yeah. But anyway, there is such a human right as a right to water. I'm sure there are many lawyers, so you know, for example, how it developed. So, for example, in 1980s, when it was first discussed in UN level, it was said, okay, yeah, we can acknowledge there is a right to water. And what it meant, no, not now. What it meant was that basically European countries and US said, yes, so now there is a human right to water, so we will sell our bottles in countries that don't have water. So they transported it there and sold it. So it was back into the discussion in 1990s when there was, yes, we have a right to water, but not to buy it from you, but you should kind of ensure it because it's a human right and it's a fourth generation right to the right to life. So then it started to be, okay, so we have to help and provide water somehow. And so now in 2011, there was actually a resolution saying that right to life is a right to water is actually in a certain distance from your home and so forth. So this is what should happen with the right to access. And right to access is a very twofold right, and that you always have to specify what we talk about, whether we talk about right to access to a connection that is affordable and so forth, or we talk about right to access to a content that flows freely and is not interfered with. So both of these rights you always have to specify. So if the UN or the Council of Europe would actually confirm that, well, this is going to be a human right, both of them, not just one of them, or without being specific. What it means in time is that from the start it would mean that companies and states would have to start respecting and ensuring and promoting, and in time there is going to be a positive obligation for a state to ensure, and positive obligation is such a nice legal institute that the state cannot actually escape anymore, and they have to provide or be liable and responsible in the international community. So I think starting with the resolution stating very concretely what we mean by right to access to the content and to the connection, and working on from there.
Thank you very much. Unpacking from the general to the particular. Kimas, you had a response to, I think, Charles's point, and then
Yeah, just I have contact with those who came to Europe just a few months ago or after the war in Syria, and most of the young people they had already a smartphone with them, but what they can do with that, it was as a GPS for the crossing the borders, and now it's a facility to talk with families, nothing else. Because as she said, so there is problem of language. Like there is not enough material, for example, about European community, about European life, about the society, about the law, rules, nothing in their language. And those who have contact with them, unfortunately, they cannot understand the culture. Or is matter of culture, not just a smartphone and mobile phone.
so maybe there's a bullet point here. I'm just, Minda, just ignore me at will. Language is more than functionality. Access is more than a thing. Culture is more than how you look. And access is multi-level. And we're looking for positive obligations for states. Okay. We have Maria lined up. We have Ruth. We have one more remote participant. Then we're going to have to round up. I'd like to do it through our hat. So Maria and Ruth, and then our remote participant.
Thanks. My name is Maria Farrell. I almost don't want to say this, but I think we also need to think about the structural inequalities that the internet is part of driving in our societies and globally. It is helping or giving means to people to constrain political debate, to close it down. It's hollowing out middle-class jobs. With automation, with the Internet of Things, we're sort of closing down public spaces for the right to protest. There are also, it does many good things, but there are just also so many harmful effects that the internet is also part of being responsible. And I don't want to be such a downer about it, but that's also part of what we're living in.
Following on from that, and also what Charles said about not wanting to make the internet something that you're required to join, I'm really aware that governments aren't somehow the good guys and companies are somehow the bad guys, and by obligate a lot of governments, I'm from the UK, and the government really wants to get people online to use the job centres in a certain way that can track you and see when you log in and what jobs you look at. And I've heard from people, both asylum seekers scared to put information on their Facebook page because it can be used against them to say that they have already financial means to support themselves, so they don't need asylum support anymore. People who've put stuff on their Facebook or other social networks that have meant that their benefits have been stopped because it's been used as evidence against them. And I don't know how many of you here would agree that we don't always put the exact truth on our social networks. So you might well put that you have a job that you don't actually have because you want to appear to fit in with the kind of cultural norms online. And at the same time, you're taking a risk because that might affect your case. And so, basically, the society itself isn't equal. Governments are not automatically pro-minorities. The internet isn't inherently a good thing, but it's something that people shouldn't be excluded from. And so one of my feelings is to look at the tech industry makeup and who is working on this, who is deciding the policies, who is building the stuff. And I think I just really want to quote from a friend of mine who is a refugee who has status in the UK, is allowed to work, but can't find a job with stuff that he has digital skills, and he's been teaching other people digital skills. And as great as it is to have all these extra external things teaching people digital skills, the best thing is when you can teach your own community and you can decide how to use the internet however you as an individual and you in relation to other people want to use it. And if you want to use it on your phone, you shouldn't be forced by the government to use it in a library. And if you want to not use it, you shouldn't be forced by someone to use it. And there's a big thing, and I think a lot of minorities, it interacts and intersects a lot with poverty, but the main issue is around lack of agency and lack of choice and fear. And I don't want any of the policies to try and fix it to be about removing more and more of our agency.
Thanks very much, Ruth. The issue of lack of agency, lack of agency. That's a great word to include in our discussion. We have an input from a remote participant.
Yeah, it's Julia Morenets. She's from Tech Together Against Cybercrime. Strangely enough, Julia wants more involvement of local authorities in finding better processes for participation of marginalized, people in the information society. And I think the policy framework or government interference depend very much on the context. I think in other regions, people tend to rely more on governments to reinforce policies, to make change. And I think she's coming from that kind of background. She's saying practically it would be interesting in having the point of view of panelists and the audience on how to bring questions to local authorities and how to bring local authorities to such events like EuroDIG. And I heard this question in the morning as well. It seems that we've been trying to hoard authorities for the last 15 years that we're having this IG discussion. They're not coming to EuroDIG or to the IGF. We don't know why. So maybe the audience have a say in that.
Any comments? We have 10 minutes to go before we wrap up. Bringing in the middle the local authorities, the city councils, the university managements. Charles, very briefly, you have a comment?
So, yeah, the first thing is it's the same thing as homeless people shouldn't have phones, right? Local council people shouldn't be going off on jaunts to nice places in Europe to talk about, airy-fairy stuff about, what they should do with the library. They should be putting stuff in the library with that money instead. So that's one of the trade-offs you get. The conversation has a price.
And we're touching on the issue of perception, which we haven't, I think, has been implicit. So, yes, please, if you feel free, yeah.
I feel like maybe we shouldn't force the local government people to come here. Maybe we should go and sit in the local government instead. We that already have this kind of interest.
Go to them, okay. Before there's some amazing things in this hat. I'd just like to try and share some of them with you. But would our panelists like to sort of just wrap up from their point of view what they've got out of this discussion very briefly, because Minda's going to be summing this all up. So, Valentina, I'm going to hold the microphone. Do it this way.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, yes, thank you. It's easier. I'm not used. Okay, so I just want to point out the internet is supposed to be a two-way communication. Means that it goes two ways and should be changed by the contribution. But the internet we were describing is an internet that is streamlined people and action. It's a mainstream internet. That's why it favors one identity, better digital. And I agree that we do not have to push each and everyone to be online. People have the right to get their salary in cash if they want. And this is an actual right, even if it's not practiced, because then we got into the perception. So I think that we should be aware of the models that are behind the internet. The internet has never been neutral. We need to continue to change, but has not to be one fit to all. Because if we come back to the one fit to all, then we come back to the same discourse that we had at the beginning, where we want to plug in the poorest or the excluded from the perfect model. Because there is one real life, and then there are the lives, the minority lives that do not deserve the title of a real life.
Kimas, did you want to say? Oh, it's okay. It's all right. Don't want to put him on the spot. So, yeah, please.
Let us just try to find solution not only based on policies. This takes so long, so we need an immediate action to help people who are in need of internet support and also education of computer use. A lot of these people come from less disadvantaged countries and they don't know even how to use computers. So to combine both, we need technology support in general as a whole package. So kindly, if you have newcomers in your area, go to those refugee camps, find how you can support from your level to find internet access to them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And that's a great segue for tomorrow's workshop, Workshop 10, where we're going to address the issues raised today with specific reference to refugees and newcomers. But in order to make that segue, I'd like to wrap up because we finish at 4, is that correct? Just checking.
Could be.
Yeah. Okay, and I think we need to respect the time so we can have our cup of tea. We've got an amazing set of things here. We're going to put them up on the wiki page, copy-type them up there. But I'm just going to allow my colleague here to read one after the other. Not all of them, but we're just going to let you know, just for the transcript, what so far people have said. Remember the question was, what is the one thing that has to change in order to confront the digital divide effectively?
Okay. Hello, I'm Tika. I'm from New Media Summer School, and I will read this. Like the first one says that it has to be valuous.
Thinking carefully about the balance between making rules and making technology that effectively encodes rules and where decisions should be made.
I have one for you here from my remote participants. Gulsan Paolo from Turkey. She thinks one thing to confront digital divide effectively is to pay attention to human rights and equality.
One thing that has to change, political will.
Human nature.
We need to define digital divide more broadly, more than access, also about education.
Okay. If there is a need, there is someone who's able and willing to satisfy that need. We just need to give access to the knowledge so that these people are able to develop it in a not so costly manner and in pace with the fast technological development.
The digital divide both reflects our existing inequalities and exacerbates them. We need to be honest with ourselves that structural inequality needs radical solutions that the internet will not provide on its own.
Define digital divide.
Yeah, I think that came up a few times. Yeah. Attitudes to the internet as an omnipotent being. It is created by humans and can therefore be adapted to suit humans. Less religion.
The level of security.
The one thing that has to change in order to confront the digital divide effectively, according to this piece of paper, is public-private partnerships.
More multilingual programs.
Go on. I can't read this one. Back in a minute. People need to feel that they have ownership of their corner of the internet, as much as, or even more than they do with physical space.
Business model, political will. People, I can't read this one.
One thing that has to change is to, I think, include universal access to the internet and to stop all forms of blocking, including geo-blocking, as one example. And what has to change is education reform with open-minded activities. Change the way we think about learning.
And language.
Anything to add? Carmen, did you put your piece of paper in there? Oh, now we know it's you, so we can't use it. But we'll include it anyway on the list. We haven't read them all out, so we have got rid of the identifier of Carmen because we haven't read them all out.
Can I add one more?
Yeah, Charles.
Complicated thing to think about as we go away. These things conflict, right? All the things we want are in conflict. The right to have a safe space and the right to free expression, which is normally interpreted to include the right to be horrible to people, are actually in conflict, and we need to think hard about where we draw those lines and how we identify the conflicts and find resolutions that are that meet our needs. Because human rights is about people. That changing the omnipotent internet into a thing for people is a pretty key thing.
Well, with that thought, I'd like to thank you all very much for being in the room and taking part. I hope you got something out of this first workshop. and you're thinking in ways, please join us. We'll get all the contributions up on our wiki page, all of them as they have arrived, totally anonymized. We'll see you tomorrow at the same time, 2:30 p.m. for workshop 10, Refugees, Newcomers, Human Rights and Access. Can we confirm what workshop room it is? Is it the same one as this? Which one is it?
According to the schedule, it's 214, 216.
So it's a bit further along this corridor. So the complicated access getting up the stairs and along the corridor still remains, but we're on this floor. Thank you very much, everyone. My thanks to our panelists. Thank you.
So we put the newcomers even further away than
Yeah,
the
I know,
marginalised
I know.
people.
I hope literally hard to read. We're not used to handwriting anymore.
Yeah.
But on the whole, I've got enough here to work on.
Oh, all right.
Good.
Lot of remote participation.
Yes, I know. They had like 7 or 8. Yeah, it's nice. Yeah. Hi, Minda. How are you doing? Nice to meet you finally. You just arrived?
Yes, I arrived. I took the train this morning.
Oh, okay. Nice, yeah.
I'm gonna go back.
You will go back. And you came by Eurostar. Oh, okay. It's expensive.
But he is, but you know, I have little thoughts for 6 months now.
Ah.
My partner was fine to take 2 days off, to take care of her. But he was concerned about my finances.
Oh.
Yes.
Oh. She sleeps next to you. Oh no. Really? So you have to sleep next to her?
Yeah, she's a high needs baby. I can't do anything for her all day. I have to sit next to her and she's working. Now she plays on the phone, but I have to feed her. And as soon as I even touch my phone on my computer, she starts laughing.
She needs a lot of attention. If you, yeah, I know, my friend also has the same issue, that her son sleeps next to her for 3 years now. Yeah, because if she's not used to stay alone, you will have to carry on doing that, you know, until she goes to her room, and that will be maybe 6, 7, I don't know, 8 years.
Yeah, well, we have to do it very slowly because it depends on the personality of the baby.
Yeah,
She's
yeah.
a different personality. If you train her on some, she's fine.
Oh, no. 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 So you have to...
So keep another. Since life was so slowly, we have fought with things going on.
Yeah.
So we moved our bed to her bed this morning.
Does she sleep throughout the night?
No, like she stays there in relation to me. Usually I'm sleeping maybe around this time. She starts sleeping alone, and then I have to say goodnight to the baby.
So you can sleep as well?
If not, she tries to sleep at night time.
No.
I have to find a solution.
Oh, yeah, that's why. I understand. No, I mean, yeah, well, that's what you have to do then. That's what you have to do.
So, and